A new year means new beginnings, new perspectives, and new resolutions. Today we hit the ground running on our first No Gray Areas podcast episode of 2024, where we explore the true meaning of happiness and what that means in our lives for this upcoming new year. Join me, your host, Pat McCalla, and special guest Brandon Lopez, where together we navigate the intricate landscape of choosing happiness throughout the year 2024 in an exclusive episode. Get ready for a thought-provoking conversation that challenges preconceptions, embraces gratitude, and inspires you to make happiness a conscious decision. So without further ado, let's dive into the episode. So Brandon, when's the last time you've been happy?
I've been happy a lot recently, actually. Well, for one, I was at your house last night and you made us tri-tip.
Yeah,
it was really good. Smoked tri-tip. And so that was good and it made me happy.
Yeah. There was a lot to be happy about with that.
Yeah. I'm here with you in this moment, sitting here with you. So that makes me happy.
Yeah. Are you saying that because I'm your father-in-law and you're trying to get some points?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Because Christmas ain't going to be good this year, so I got to rack up those points. No, yesterday morning, I picked up my daughter Keena from her class at church, and she just started screaming, "My daddy's here! My daddy's here!"
That
and of course,
that
made me. Couldn't even fight.
And I can attest to our listeners that Keena is one of the most beautiful, gorgeous little girls in the whole world.
It's all right, Pat. You don't have to
I know
lie.
She's my granddaughter.
The most beautiful.
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked that is because for the last couple of weeks, you and I have had quite a few discussions with different people about happiness, and it was really interesting. There's some people that said, like, I don't remember the last time I was happy. And then it really got us into a long conversation sitting around a fire one night. So we thought as we jump into 2024 at No Gray Areas, and we talk about the power and complexity of human choices, maybe we start this year by talking about the choice of happiness. So let's start by just defining it, because that was part of the conversation we've had. You've had conversations with people, I've had conversations with people, and part of it comes down to people going, well, what is happiness actually? So what do you think are some synonyms? I'm trying to throw a word out there that makes me sound smart. Yeah. What do you think some synonyms of happiness are? Like if someone goes, what is happiness? Well, add some words.
Yeah, I would describe happiness with other words as, being fulfillment, satisfaction, gratefulness, joy, things of that nature. Yeah. Contentment.
Mm-hmm. You said gratefulness, right? Mm-hmm. Because I know that was one that we came up with often. Yeah. It seemed like as we unpacked this, the more you and I thought about this, the more we kind of landed with, man, if you have a lack of gratefulness or you're ungrateful, probably going to struggle with happiness. What do you think are some antonyms? As we talked about it, remember one night around the fire we were talking about antonyms, the opposite of a synonym for people that English classes a long
went to public
time
school,
in their past, or if you went to public school and you never actually learned that. What's an antonym of happiness?
Well, typically, the first thing that comes to your mind is probably like sadness.
Yeah.
Well, oftentimes we get disappointment, depression, feeling of just being depressed, and not necessarily like depression. A lot of times we associate depression with more of a chronic issue or mental illness. Sometimes you could just be depressed. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. Yeah. A few others might, a lot of people, if they feel frustrated, they might be like, well, I can't be happy if I'm frustrated or angry. So yeah.
You know what was really fascinating when we were talking about this? You brought up a great point. You were saying that it's happiness kind of on a continuum, right? How did you describe it? Do you remember that?
Yeah. So I always see happiness as, kind of on a continuum. It's not necessarily like
you're happy or not.
Yeah, you're not necessarily happy or you're not. It's more so like how happy are you?
Yeah,
and how happy aren't you?
Yeah.
And I think...
And at first when you said that, here's what was interesting. When you said that, I was a little lost because I was like, I don't get quite where you're going with that. But now keep going because it really landed for me.
Yeah, so I think a lot of times is that when we think of happiness, we can even put like good and bad in the same kind of conversation as far as the continuums. Like it's, good is more like how good is something and how good isn't something, right? But the way I like to see it is that oftentimes we like to, a lot of times when we make something like you can only be happy or not happy, oftentimes we put that line there ourselves, right? And that's what I find with most people. And I think this is where a lot of people might struggle with happiness, and where we probably found when we were talking to other people where their struggle was, is that their expectation for what would qualify anything for them to be happy about was just so beyond what I think is kind of just the regular threshold. So for instance, like the way I kind of, my philosophy around the human experience is that we don't necessarily deserve to be happy. That makes sense. I think when I look around the world, obviously there's no shortage of grief in this world, right? And the same coin of that, you could say like, well, okay, if there's a great supply of grief, there must be also a great supply of, goodness. And I think that's absolutely true. But as far as the human experience goes, is that, especially it's kind of hard to see this as, American within our culture, depending on where you're at. But a lot of times is we go about life thinking that we deserve and that we're entitled to be happy and to have things given to us.
Oh man, is that not true? Our culturally, we probably live in a culture that, from the time you're a kid, every advertisement that comes on, it's almost like it's an expectation. Like you deserve to be happy.
You're perfect the way before that you go there, you're all these other things come into play too.
But before we go there, because you started transitioning to something else we talked about, which we got to get to. But where that landed for me, Brandon, when we were sitting around the fire and you talked about that happiness is kind of on a continuum, I thought that is why some people start, when they go, when were you happy? They think, well, I can't be happy and sad at the same time. But actually you can. Like, it's not going to be that explosive happiness where it's just like, man, my heart just wants to burst. I'm looking at my little granddaughter running to me saying, Poppy, that's that there's nothing else but happiness. But if I were to lose my wife and she passed away, and 2 weeks after the funeral, I'm sitting there and I remember a memory that we had that was just a beautiful memory. And I may be sitting there in my kitchen alone at that moment crying because I'm sad, but I'm remembering a happy memory. So I'm happy and sad at the same time. So that's where, when you talked about that night, I was like, wow, that is true. That there's this continuum of happiness that we have. And so I think that will help people understand a little bit.
And what's interesting about that kind of example that you just gave too, on that continuum of happiness, that would fall, in my perspective, more of being content, because contentment is a lot having to do with a state of happiness in a current condition that you're in. Right?
Yes.
And it's not just, and so like,
a state of happiness in the current condition that you're in. Now, see, this is where you're really good at this, because you keep transitioning to this. Now we're jumping into this part, because this is so good. This is so important. And that's where you were talking a little bit about where we think we deserve happiness. 2,000 years ago, one of the greatest philosophers and theologians that ever walked this planet, a guy named Paul, wrote that he found the secret to contentment. We could probably, because we were talking about the synonyms, say the secret of happiness, right? And he said, and he actually is referring to something that actually thousands of years before him, a guy named Job wrote. If we came in with nothing, naked I came into the world, and naked I'm going to leave the world. So I start with nothing and I end with nothing. Anything above nothing is a reason to be content, happy, grateful, right? And that's where you were talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like, to say that your baseline of what your expectation of the human experience ought to be, if we bring that down to, well, if the basic experience that the average human will experience is more on the line of suffering, I guess you could say, or if that's more of like the basic line, that anything that is above suffering is going to be so much more, you could be so much more grateful for. You could actually experience it in more of, more fulfillment with that. And the reason why I think a lot of people struggle with happiness is that we go about life more so like talking about like we're entitled to happiness. We have a right to be happy. We have this privilege to be happy. The issue with that I find with most people is, if you put the threshold in which you can experience happiness all the way up there until you are able to actually experience happiness.
Like on the very, very high line of the continuum.
Exactly. Yeah. For one, if you think that you deserve something, you are now entitled to it, which means you cannot be grateful. And gratefulness and happiness usually always are intertwined.
Oh, so I think that's such an important point you're making. They are linked. They're tied. You can't separate them.
Can't separate them.
Yeah, I agree.
And so if you can't truly be grateful, and you can't be grateful for something if you deserve it because it's what's expected. I deserve this job. I deserve this raise. I deserve this family.
Yeah.
You can't truly be grateful because you already expect it.
There's an expectation.
It's expectation.
Yeah.
But the problem now is, and what I think a lot of people have is, if this is your expectation that you deserve these things and you're entitled to these things, then anything less than those things, now that means something's wrong with you. Now you're unhappy. Now you're probably feeling depressed.
Yep.
Now you're disappointed and frustrated. Yep. And I think that to kind of weave this into it, I think a lot of people, when you live in this kind of way, you're going to run into this problem of operating with this kind of motivation that is shame, self-hate, negative talk.
Yeah.
Because you're experiencing nothing that truly makes you happy. Because you deserve that, you feel like you deserve happiness. Which, again, let's make sure we also define that. I believe that happiness is more fleeting, more of a fleeting emotion. And I'm not saying fleeting as a negative way. It's more of when we feel happiness, a lot of it is just a reaction of what's going on.
It's almost like trying to harness the wind. Mm-hmm. Like you try to grab it and maybe you can harness for a moment, but then it's gone. So so what you're describing, right, is if you're sitting out and you're paying attention to those moments, and there's a beautiful sunset, and so you sit there and you choose to be happy, content, grateful for the beauty of that moment, but it's gone. Mm-hmm. The sun sets, the colors disappear, and it's gone. That's kind of where you're talking about,
absolutely.
Right?
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That you're not going to have that ongoing 24/7 feeling of that emotion of happiness.
Yeah. And I think the way that the world around us tells us the other way around, right? Everything that all the products, all the services that we get bombarded with on TV, on the radio, online, through Facebook, Instagram, all this stuff is like, everything is based off of convenience and making you happier. Yeah. So anything that we don't experience that actually makes us happy because our expectations are so high, then we feel depressed and angry, frustrated. And so what usually happens in my observation with people is we end up, having a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of shame, a lot of self-hate, because we're not getting what we want out of life. So something must be wrong. Yeah. Now, the problem with this is very interesting. The problem with this is that most people, I'll say most, or many, not everybody, many people don't want to hate themselves forever.
Yeah.
So what happens, and this is something I've been sitting on, what happens is that their current reality becomes a punishment because they feel like anything that they're living out isn't good enough. Right? So they associate their current reality as a punishment. And what do we do when we feel punished? We want to rebel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And oftentimes, and this is something that we can tie in now too, is
we learn that at a really young age, don't we?
Yeah.
You have little kids. You're seeing that firsthand.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Yeah. You don't have to teach them to do that. And we just go on all the way through adulthood.
Yep.
That's our natural reaction to that. Yeah.
Aren't you happy we grew out of that?
Yeah, whatever. So what does that mean then? There's some self-loathing. Mm-hmm. There's some frustration going on because we feel like we should get this or deserve this and we don't get it. So there's some shame that comes with that. And then you're saying rebelling. What do you mean?
Yeah. So what I mean by rebelling is that we're now left with options of how do we react with what our current reality is. One, we have to break down our self-beliefs that are wrong. Yeah. And then create new frameworks to operate in, or we self-destruct, or what a lot of people do is they create themselves a new reality. Yeah. And so this kind of goes into, on the way here, we're talking about like, oftentimes we talk about like, are you happy or not?
Self-medicating.
Self-medicating.
Right? Like creating a new reality. That's where we get into dangerous things of self-medicating with whatever that
absolutely
our drug of choice, if you will.
Yeah, and we seek happiness through all these different things that are more of just a hit to the brain of dopamine that makes us feel good. So we see this as, sexual partners. We see this as drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all these different things. Yep. And what makes us then caffeine, ask us this,
like all those things, right?
Now we have to ask ourselves is like, what is the motive though now behind happiness? Why is it that we want to be happy? Why is it that we want to be satisfied?
Now this is getting deep. Yeah. This is getting deep. So what's the motive? That's what you're asking.
What is the motive? My theory is our motive to be happy is there's two words that come to my mind, and I use them, pretty much the same. They're synonymous to me. Is to be loved and to be important. Because if you want to be loved, the way that you feel loved is to be known and to feel important. And to be important, you have to feel to be known and to be made priority.
Another synonym of important would be valued, right?
Valued, priority.
To be loved, to be valued. Like that's, well, I would totally agree with that, Brandon, because there's not a human being that's ever been on this planet that doesn't crave that from the time they first start learning to walk, or even before they're learning to walk, right? They want to be loved, valued. They want to feel important. So you're saying that's the motivation, the underlying motivation, and happiness is tied to that.
Oh, yeah.
That when we feel happy, there's usually I'm feeling loved and valued. That's connected to that.
And we see this as like a counterfeit in many things around our lives. For instance, we see this in status. So a lot of people or a lot of products that we see, whether it be cars, watches, clothing, brands, they
wear
accentuate
this, I'm gonna feel
status that you have with it, make you feel important,
Yeah.
which makes you feel happy. Now it's a counterfeit because it's just a thing, right? We see this as
usually fleeting.
Fleeting, yeah. We see this with somebody that has, let's say, even like many sexual partners. What they're doing is they're trying to make themselves feel loved and important by bringing about happiness, which is counterfeit. They see this in anything else. Like, well, usually when we see any kind of abuse with drugs or alcohol, it's an escaping of reality. So this is what happens that I've noticed, or this has kind of been playing in my head. Another way that we rebel, whether it's through self-destruction, but also changing your reality, is, and this is going to more of an extreme end of things, right? When I'm about to go on the extreme end of things, if feeling important, feeling loved is the core motivation for wanting to be happy and satisfied and feeling fulfillment in life, then, and if your current reality isn't giving you that, what people then often do is they create themselves a new reality.
Yeah.
That they can live that out. And so I was reading this book by Dale Carnegie, and he was talking about a head physician at an insane center, and he was asking him questions, and they were talking about like, so half of our patients, they are clinically insane because they had actual damage to their brain cells, whether it be through toxins, any kind of substance abuse,
injury,
and trauma to the head, things like that. But what they noticed that in post-mortem, when they were looking at the brain of the other half of their patients, there was nothing wrong with their brain. They looked like yours and I or everybody else. Half of their patients, what they found, and at least at this time, what they concluded was half these patients, there was nothing necessarily quote unquote wrong with them as far as like organically, as far as trauma done to their head, like damage to their brain cell. What they concluded was at this time is that those patients literally were so unhappy, so unloved, felt so unimportant in their reality that they created a new reality to make them feel better. So he gave an example of this patient, this woman, that she wanted a loving husband that respected her, that she wanted status, she wanted the family and the kids, but she had a very abusive husband. She did not have the status. She didn't have kids. So what she ended up doing was she made this reality in her head that I can't remember what name. She was like, she made up a new name for herself, like Lady something. She was married to this British guy of royalty, had kids, and she would refer to him as kids. Like, oh, my kids came and visited me.
This is just a whole fantasy
and this
world
is
that she's created.
Now, this is this is definitely extreme end of things. But we see this play out in mental illness a lot of times. We see this played out in a lot of different people as far as when we see somebody, and this is the danger of somebody that is very unhappy, very unsatisfied with their life and their reality, is discontent. There's usually three options that you're left with. You either have to break self-beliefs and then create new frameworks to operate under. You self-destruct, and or in another way of self-destruct is you just rebel because now your reality is seen as a punishment because you're not happy, so you create a new reality. And when we have groups or communities that help support those ideologies too, this is where it gets, interesting. This is where like understanding like brain science is actually pretty fun and interesting, and social sciences, is that when you have somebody that creates a new reality for them and they plug themselves into a community that supports them or a family that supports them, they are only enhancing and edifying this new reality. So now they're actually being able to live out this reality as a happy individual, feeling fulfillment,
but it's not a pretend world
and satisfaction. But that's how now they're perceiving the world around them. That's how they perceive their reality. It's very interesting.
This is why this is so important as we jump into 2024. As the listeners of No Gray Areas jump into 2024, you and I both wanted to have this discussion because it was almost heartbreaking to hear like some going, I don't remember the last time I was happy, or I can't remember ever being happy. And while that is a continuum, as we've discussed, is it that explosive, my heart's going to just burst, I'm so happy? Or is it, I'm sad, but I'm remembering a happy memory? So there's all kinds of different levels of happiness and continuum. That it's also based and connected tightly to contentment. 2,000 years ago, the greatest theologian and philosopher said, I learned the secret of contentment and happiness. I came with nothing, I'm leaving with nothing. So anything above that. So really our listeners, I think as we go into 2024, it's a great challenge for them to say, you will have a plethora, thousands, tens of thousands of opportunities in the next coming weeks and months that there's something above the baseline of nothing, right?
Yep.
You had a good meal. That's worth being happy, choosing happiness, so contentment. You saw a sunset. You looked at your spouse, your significant other, your child, your grandkid, whatever it might be, but it's above the baseline of nothing, which is worth then being content or happy about. And I think too that the psalmist 3,000 years ago, the psalmist wrote this verse: "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." And you remember I texted this to you the night after we had this conversation around the fire, and I go, Brandon, I think I thought of the verse that sums it all up. This is the day. Not yesterday, not tomorrow. Part of our problem with happiness and contentment is we're looking at the past, which we can't do anything about, or we're worried about the future. But the psalmist says, this is the day, this day. And then he says, I will rejoice. I will. It's an act of will. It's a choice. You're a trainer, you train people right in the gym, and you know that how much is connected to like discipline, right? You're just making a choice. You make a choice on what you're going to eat. You're going to make a choice on whether you're going to get up and go to the gym. I think happiness is the same way, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Like it's an act of will a lot of times. Like I'm not going to miss this moment because this is above the baseline of nothing. I came with nothing. I'm leaving with nothing. So right now I'm going to choose to be happy. So I think what you and I are wanting to do is right now as we launch into 2024 to say to our audience, to ourselves, let's make sure that we resolve, because we're doing resolutions, resolve that during the day you make a choice to find those many, many things that you're going to have that are above the baseline of nothing, and then choose happiness, choose contentment.
Absolutely.
And when we don't do that, it leads to, what are some of the things you mentioned before?
Sadness, anger, frustration, depression.
Yeah. Creating a false reality or a fantasy world at the extreme of it, on the stream of it. Yeah. So I think that's a great challenge for us to go into. So I'm going to try to do that today, this week, to choose happiness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Brandon, thanks so much for being on the No Gray Areas podcast again. Before we go, though, we talked about making the choice for happiness. Now I'm going to ask you to choose to lie to me. It's the way we end it's ironic, but two truths and a lie. There's no way you're going to stump me.
I got you.
I know you too well.
First one, I have stabbed a guy in the face before. Second one, Okinawa was the first flight I ever been on. And third one, I had a mullet when I was 4 years old.
Okay. Oh, wow. You stabbed a guy in the face. When you went to Okinawa, that was the first flight you had ever been on, and you had a mullet at 4 years old. I'm going with the mullet is true. I mean, look right now. You got this. Yeah.
I did, in fact, have a mullet when I was 4.
Okay. I need to see this.
And it was down to my butt.
Are you serious?
It was all curly and everything. Yeah.
Okay. I got to see those pictures.
It was magic.
All right. I got a 50-50 chance. You know, this stabbed someone in the face. I'm going to say that's true.
That is true.
Okay. Tell us that story.
Yeah.
What?
So Okinawa was not the first flight I'd been on. I
kind of thought it was. Yeah, because I thought it was.
No, I went going to Virginia when I was younger. When I was doing martial arts, we were doing night defense, and I was working with one of my instructors, and I was the attacker. And we kept just going through repetitive motion over and over and over. And he was like, let's go faster, let's go faster, let's go faster. I'm like, all right. And then we went for one. He messed up, and it was a knife, right? But it was like a real knife. Like it wasn't like I could do this and it wouldn't cut me, but it was definitely sharp. Like point.
You could still hurt someone.
So I could still remember the feeling of the tip of the blade hitting his like right above his eyebrow, scraping down his skull and like stretching his skin. And like I pulled back, and I was like in high school, like I was like maybe 14 at the time.
Oh, so you're not like a little kid. Yeah.
And I pulled back, and I was like, oh. And he was like, ah. And he like looks at me, he's like, oh, let's keep going. And he starts bleeding. I'm like, oh, no, you're bleeding. Like I'm not like. Head instructor comes in, what happened? And I was like, I stabbed him in the face, and he was like, oh shoot. He's like, it's not your fault, Brandon. It's his fault. He didn't defend himself.
He was showing you how a poor defense.
Yeah. So I got like for a couple days, my nickname was Slasher. But yeah, that is true.
That's good.
But not out of ill intent. I did not stab somebody out of ill intent.
Yeah. Good to know. All right.
Yeah,
Good.
For anybody listening.
Well, thanks again, Brandon. Thanks for being here. Those were good 2 truths and a lie. Appreciate it. All right. See you next time. As we draw the curtains on this New Year's episode, we hope the insights shared by our conversation have ignited a spark within you. We pray this episode inspired you to actively choose joy in the smallest moments, leading you to a fulfilling year in 2024. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of happiness. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations in our future podcast episode that drops every other Wednesday. We'll catch you next time. No gray areas.